This is the Thayer podcast for April 6th, 2023. I read a story the other day that blamed the so-called banking crisis on COVID-19. Well, that almost makes sense. You'll recall that in early 2020, the government started pumping money into the economy in the form of payments to compensate folks for reduced or non-existent work hours, incentives to stay home, and all sorts of other economic stimuli. There was hardly any way for people at the time to spend all that extra cash, so they started putting it in their savings accounts. Well, the banks didn't know what to do with all that extra money, so they invested it in long-term government securities that paid better interest than short-term offerings. A year or so down the road, we got hit with inflation caused by all that extra government-allocated money, so the Fed decided to raise interest rates to slow it down. That lowered the value of those long-term investments, and all of a sudden, some institutions like the Silicon Valley Bank got caught with their pants down. They didn't have enough money to cover the devaluation of those coveted high-interest government-backed bonds and securities. And so it appears the case could be made that COVID caused the downfall of the Silicon Valley Bank. Now, with just a tiny little nudge, any liberal could easily make the case that it was all Trump's fault. After all, if it hadn't been for our government's skullduggery, we would have never been exposed to that Chinese Wuhan Laboratories leaked experiment, which was funded by Trump's Department of Health and Human Services through the National Institutes of Health. Yeah, well, coulda, woulda, shoulda, as they say. There always has to be a scapegoat. As I look back on my own life, I think of all the times I blamed someone else for my many bad choices and missed opportunities. Isn't that just what's been happening for many decades in America? Hasn't our government been making the same stupid choices we ourselves have been making? Haven't our leaders been blaming everything and everyone else for their shortcomings? How long can we live with this nonsense? Our lives are no less fleeting than the policies our government leaders adopt and reject. There's just so much time anyone can allocate for stupidity and bad decisions. Perhaps it's time we took stock of what we have left and turned things around ourselves by putting the blame for our misfortunes exactly where it belongs, which is right here, tightly held in our very own hands. Improvise, adapt, overcome. Semper Fi.